Imagine a world where chicken feed doesn't cost so much that your chickens are laying $10 eggs. Yeah, I know. Chicken feed costs right now are ridiculously expensive. And so I'm going to show you 5 strategies that I'm using right now to reduce the cost. Now, some of these are 100% free and some require an upfront cost, but all of them are focused at reducing long-term feed costs. Let's get started. Now, let me just say that you can't do this particular one by itself. This needs to be combined with some of my other methods. And that is, I mix low quality and high quality feed. I buy 3 bags of kind of the standard low quality feed and 2 bags of a higher quality feed. And then I use that same ratio when mixing the feed for the chickens. I also will supplement with some omega-3 and some crushed eggshells that have been sterilized or some oyster shell. Now, like I said, you can't just be doing this by itself. It would probably mean a lower quality nutrition profile for your chickens. But if you're doing it in combination with some of the other things that I'm doing, I think you'll see that your chickens will be just fine. So let's take a look at the second thing that I'm doing. Next up, timing. I don't free feed store-bought feed to my chickens. Well, not exactly. You see, what happens when you free feed your chickens is you're also many times free feeding mice, rats, squirrels, chipmunks, wild birds, and on and on. Now, in addition to this not being a good idea because of disease and nuisance, it's also expensive. And so one of the benefits of me measuring out the feed in advance is when I can see that there's not enough feed left behind or there's too much feed left behind, I know how to adjust their feeding. And then that way they're being satisfied, they're getting as much as they want. But you know how chickens are. When they eat, they kick stuff all over the place. And when they kick stuff all over the place, there's feed everywhere, and then everyone has access to it. Whereas when there's a finite amount, they'll eat it all. And if you time it just right, there's some left over because everyone was satisfied, but there's not a lot left over to attract pests. So I have found that that actually saves me a decent amount of money approaching it that way. Now, this next method is 100% free and it generates quite a bit of food. Check this out. The third solution is asking around. You know, restaurants, bakeries, schools, your friends waste a lot of food. They throw a lot of food away. And many of them aren't aware of a solution to this waste. And so I ask a lot of restaurants, bakeries, schools, and friends if they have scraps. And by doing so, I have generated a lot of feed for my chickens. I've discovered that restaurants that use a lot of vegetables, so this means Asian restaurants, Indian restaurants, that sort of thing, they have a lot of scraps from cutting up vegetables. And so now what happens is they will text me and say, hey, we have a bag of scraps for your chickens. I drive over, pick them up, and the chickens are pretty happy about that whole situation. So talk to your friends, talk to restaurants, talk to schools. I have a school that gives me their scraps and leftovers, and it generates a huge amount of food. In fact, sometimes it's too much for my 6 chickens. And so I either share it with fellow chicken keepers, or if it's getting a little bit soft, it goes into the compost. And so it's literally a win-win-win. Now, the last 2 strategies that I'm using are probably the ones that I'm most excited about because they have the potential to yield the most nutritional benefits for my chickens. And so let's check out number 4. Next up, mealworm farming. Now, mealworm farming is surprisingly easy to do. It does require a little bit of time and a little bit of an upfront cost. Obviously, you need to buy the mealworms and you need someplace to put them. I had this 6-drawer plastic cabinet knocking around in my basement for years, and it was the perfect place to keep the mealworms. The basic idea of keeping mealworms is you feed them, they eat the scraps that no one else will eat. I mean, mealworms literally will eat anything. There are YouTube videos of mealworms eating styrofoam. Now, obviously that's stupid, but it makes the point that mealworms will eat anything. So what happens is the mealworms pupate. They become a little pupa, and so then you separate that pupa up into the top shelf here. There's a false bottom with some window screen. And then once the darkling beetle emerges, they mate, and they lay 500 eggs each. That's a lot of eggs. The eggs fall through the screen down into this next drawer that has a medium of food and moisture that they like, and the cycle goes on and on. The beauty of mealworms is you can't overfeed your chickens, or you shouldn't, I should say, overfeed your chickens mealworms, because they're so potent in protein that it'll actually give your chickens gout if you overfeed them. And so that's pretty awesome, because that means it's a quality food source that you don't need a massive amount of. And so before I did this, I checked with my chickens to make sure, hey, do you guys like eating mealworms? And it was a unanimous yes. They love mealworms. So there you have it. It's pretty easy to do. Park them in a dark corner in your basement, periodically making sure that you feed them and give them something for moisture. Now, the last method that I'm using is something that I'm really excited about because it has the potential to pack a pretty decent nutritional punch, just like mealworms. And that is, well, let me show you. Lastly, protected pasturing. I've mentioned many times before that I have to keep my chickens in a chicken tractor because I have daily and nightly visits from predators. But if you have a chicken tractor, you know keeping them in a confined space like that means they really dig the soil up wherever they're parked. This means that the plants that you want them to eat eventually get so torn up that they either barely produce or they die. And so that can be a problem because then it's just a lifeless patch of torn up soil. I've come up with something that seems to be working really well. What I do is I loosen up the soil in a 2-foot by 25-foot strip. Then I remove all the rocks and I overseed it with a commercial pasture mix. There'll be some links in the description for some of the different ones that I've tried. But here's the trick. I then lay a 2-foot by 25-foot rabbit fence over the top of the area that I've overseeded. I make staples, like ground cloth staples, out of coat hangers, and then I cover it with my little mini greenhouse covers that are actually left over from an actual greenhouse that I took apart years ago. And you could just use plastic, anything along those lines. But what it does is it prevents the chickens from scratching up the soil and the plants so much that the plants can't survive. And then this means that the plants are around in the future to feed your chickens again. Now, some of you newer chicken owners might wonder, well, why not just cover the whole pasture with this fencing? And then that way you can have all of that available. Well, chickens have to dig. They need to be able to scratch, dig, and bathe in bare soil. And so that would really mess with their health if you covered an entire area that the chickens lived with netting. In fact, I see that sometimes where people have a chicken run and it's completely covered with mesh. And so the chickens can't really dig in the soil. This is bad. This is not good for a chicken's health. They need contact with bare soil. So that's why this is kind of a happy meeting point, because as you can see, the tractor rolls over and there's just a strip in the middle where the food is, and then on either side are places where they can bathe and dig. So there you have it. Those are the 5 strategies that I'm using right now to reduce long-term chicken feed costs. But I'd love to know what you're doing. Let's talk about it in the discussion area below. And of course, as always, if you liked this video, you might like these.